Breaking news. Before I started my conversation with David Cay Johnston, he told me, did you hear what happened at Stonewall? Here it is from ABC News and every other outlet. The National Park Service eliminated references to transgender people from its Stonewall National Monument website on Thursday, which now only refers to those who are lesbian, gay, and bisexual. What used to be listed as LGBTQ plus in the monument has been changed to LGB. David Cay Johnston, can we look past that? That's petty. It's horrible. It's depressing. It makes me want to fight, but there are bigger fish to fry. Why should we care about that?
Well, this is right out of George Orwell. And remember that George Smith, the central character in 1984's job, was to rewrite history so people would not know actual history. They would know only what the state wanted them to know. And you could certainly dismiss this and say, oh, it's symbolic and who cares? And who cares if you're cis and straight like me? Well, you should care because if you want to become our dictator, and that's what I've been saying for 9.5 years is Donald's goal, because Donald really believes he's special. Nobody else is competent to do this. You have to rewrite history. You have to remove history. Wasn't that long ago that the state of Texas was on the verge of adopting a new textbook, which said that Black people came here from Africa in search of better lives. And only because the New York Times exposed that did that not go into the textbooks that children would be reading today. Because we need to get rid of, there was no slavery. What are you talking about? And those who were enslaved, they were better off, and other absolute falsehoods. And this is part of a pattern you're going to see much more of. They're wiping out references to accomplishments by Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, indigenous people, gay people, women.
And I think that while all of those are horrific and we see exactly what that means, a lot of these things are, Stonewall was a long time ago, but what else they're doing is they're erasing the recent past. Most specifically, what I saw a lot of reporting on was there's supposed to be a plaque at that tunnel outside the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., where January 6th, the horrible attack on police officers was. They were going to put a plaque up there, and that plaque never made it up there. So they're erasing the recent history by preventing things to be commemorated, by redoing the investigations into January 6th. But with that, you're talking about Stonewall. We're talking about women's history and suffrage and Black history. I'm talking about what we saw with our own eyes. They're erasing it.
Well, I wouldn't be shocked. I'm not predicting this will happen, but I won't be shocked if a plaque does go up and refers to January 6th as a day of love where patriots work to take back our democracy.
Oh God, that would put me way over the top.
That would be even more Orwellian.
Oh
but,
man.
We have an administration that has been crystal clear, at least in my observations of it, about what's going on. They are white supremacists. They are misogynists. Donald has said many times, and people should know I've covered him since 1988. In fact, I wrote that year and again in 1992 about how he might become president someday, that this administration is trying to destroy America as we have known it and make sure that anyone who isn't white, straight, male, and nominally Christian knows their place. So and they're working very hard to do that, Pete.
Yeah, and that's very well said and well documented. But the damages the suffering that's going to occur, the damages that are going to be done are going to affect white, straight, male Christians.
Oh, yeah.
Steve Bannon yesterday said, I wouldn't mess with Medicaid, MAGA, a lot of MAGA on Medicaid. My question to you is, before we get specific of any of these things, what happens, do you think, and how does this get reported out? Because they can try to target blue state liberals, minorities, etc., but they can't be that specific, I don't think, certainly not with the idiots in charge of targeting. So what happens when MAGA loses their benefits, their subsidies, their jobs?
Well, much as they want to repeal the Affordable Care Act by confusing people, there are lots of interviews with people who go, oh, the Affordable Care Act is this critical to my family. What do you think of Obamacare? Oh, we have to get rid of that. And of course, it's the same thing. There's a real risk for Trump and company if they try to cut Medicaid and get rid of the Affordable Care Act. I don't think that's going to be in the front of their plans to do. There will be damage. We're already seeing some farmers saying, wait a minute, I sell my corn or soybeans or rice primarily to the Agency for International Development, the American Humanitarian Aid Organization.
Right, USAID, yeah.
Yes, and you're harming my business interests. There are going to be Republican lawmakers from the heartland who are going to say, we're going to be hurt by this.
Yeah.
And sooner or later, the following is going to happen. There are some really pernicious viruses out there, vastly worse than COVID. 25 years ago or so, we had MERS, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome.
Yeah, I remember that.
We know of 2,500 infections. 800 of those people died. That's incredibly deadly.
Bad one. That'll get
There
you.
are similar viruses in parts of Africa that we have corralled because we're providing people with antiviral medicines and other treatment. That's all been stopped. Well, those viruses will now spring back to life in those people's bodies. They will eventually kill them. But in the meantime, those viruses are going to start hopscotching around the planet on jetliners. And we're going to have at some point another pandemic from these kinds of illnesses, which may be vastly more deadly than we had before. And we have running our health systems a man who doesn't believe in vaccines, R.F. Kennedy Jr. So letting Trump be Trump, LTBT, let Trump be Trump, will undo and get some people from practical reality to see what's gone wrong. But the price we're going to pay for that's enormous.
You know as much as anybody the price in so many different ways, so many different sectors of our economy that you can speak to. So I've got all these notes on which, to ask you. But I thought it might be really interesting because a thing or two about the law as well, to ask you about the news that broke, a couple days ago, and over the past couple of days, that the Trump administration Department of Justice is going to let Eric Adams off the hook. They're trying to drop all charges. Now, of course, it was the Biden Department of Justice that indicted him in the first place for corruption charges, which you could probably speak to if we need to. But the bottom line is a Democratic president, Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, indicts a Democratic mayor of New York,
of the most democratic city in the country,
Eric Adams. And then Trump comes in. And Eric Adams basically reaches out, I think, to make a deal. And the deal, it seems, is, yes, we'll drop all charges, and you have to let us do whatever we want vis-a-vis deportations, ICE, immigration, and not prevent any of those things from happening, which New York City has done in the past. What is this called? The Department of Justice right now, the lead lawyers on it have resigned. It's a huge story last night. It's a brave thing to do. They then kicked it to, I think, a different sector, right? The Department of Justice in D.C. Those guys then resigned. So they can't get anybody in the Department of Justice to do the work that needs to be done to actually drop the charges against Eric Adams. What do you want to say about that?
They will find somebody who will do this eventually. This is an utterly corrupt deal. It is the very definition of what the framers of our Constitution were worried about. Early in the history of our country, Benjamin Franklin was our ambassador to France. When he left, the King of France gave him a bejeweled snuff box. And there was a huge scandal about this, not because of any venality by Benjamin Franklin, but because it suggested that someone would try to buy our government and our policies. And that's what the framers were worried about. They all knew we would always have individual people like Eric Adams who do corrupt things, but you have to protect the institution from that and get those people out. What Donald Trump is doing here with pardoning people who attacked police officers and who, when pardoned, said, we're going to go hurt more people, by pardoning the former governor of Illinois who tried to sell the seat that Barack Obama vacated when he became president, and other people, is to institutionalize corruption just so long as the corruption benefits Donald. And because he controls the Justice Department through his utterly corrupt Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and he has his former criminal defense lawyers. Remember, Donald Trump is a convicted felon in senior positions in the Justice Department. They're going to set up a system to go after people Donald thinks are his enemies and to protect people who are his friends. Now, I don't expect most of the MAGA crowd to understand that because it isn't something direct to them. It's not visceral to them. What's going to happen with the, as Donald loves to say, the poorly educated, is inflation is already ticking up now when it had been coming down under Biden sharply. we are seeing problems again with the availability of various kinds of goods because of the policies of this administration. And it's going to take a while, but what Donald proposes to do on an economic front with tariffs has to lead to higher prices. Donald doesn't understand that because he is, in terms of economics, a mercantilist. The mercantilists were the people prior to Adam Smith writing The Wealth of Nations in 1776. That's the first book that explained market economics. So, Pete, if you and I were talking, and this was right now the year 1550, we would believe in two critical things that Adam Smith undid. The first one is all acts of virtue are Christian virtue. If you're a Jew or a Muslim or a Hindu or anything else, you cannot have virtue. Secondly, we would believe that every piece of gold that the Spanish or the British or the French have is a piece of gold we don't have because there's a fixed amount of wealth in the world. And in Donald's mind, he doesn't see economic growth because he's never done economic growth. He is a cash extractor. Every business he ran, with one exception, he had no money in. He borrowed all of the money, took a fee off the top up front, so he had a negative position, and then sucked cash out of them until the business failed. And so Donald doesn't know how to create wealth. We know as a society how to create wealth. My goodness, compare us to the founding of the country in 1787, compare us to the year 1900, compare us to the year when Ronald Reagan took office, 1981. We've been fabulously successful at creating wealth, not so much at distributing it, but absolutely at creating it.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
And Donald thinks China and Canada and Mexico pay the tariffs. And nobody can get through to him that, no, it's effectively a sales tax on Americans. And the worst part of this, Pete, economically, is that the tariffs on these foreign countries also make it possible for domestic companies to raise their prices. So just imagine for a moment that you own Pete Dominick cars and you sell them out your factory to your dealers at $10,000 each and you make a $1,000 profit. And China has a competing car. Donald puts his tariff on it. He was proposing 60%. So they now have to charge people $16,000. Well, you're not going to keep your price at 10. You're going to raise your price to $15,000. You're going to make a profit not of $1,000 a car, but $6,000. And let's assume because of the higher price and people can't afford it, that you sell half as many cars. You're making 3 times the profit you were making before. So this is a scheme to drag money out of the pockets of consumers and put it into the pockets of people who own companies. And one of the best signs that that's what's going on occurred yesterday, or day before yesterday. Chevron, the second biggest oil company after ExxonMobil, announced record revenues, record profits, record amounts of oil produced, record amounts of oil refined, record dividends to shareholders, and a record stock buyback for them of $75 billion worth of existing shares, and laying off as many as 20% of the people who made all that possible. This is a scheme to give the rich even more and to destroy jobs, to hurt people. And eventually it has to fail. It can't work in the long run. If lots of people lose their jobs, the whole economy will slide, but that will take time.
Man, I trying to think of which are the best and most important issues to ask the great David Cay Johnston, but I got to ask you this one. This is a story I feel like I haven't heard enough about. Maybe I just haven't read enough about it, but it seems pretty consequential. Here's Ken Delaney writing at NBC News. In a little notice directive on her first day in office, Attorney General Pam Bondi ordered a halt to a years-old federal law enforcement effort which combats secret influence campaigns by China, Russia, and other adversaries that try to curry favor and sow chaos in American politics. Buried on the 4th page of one of the 14 policy memos Bondi issued Wednesday, the order disbands the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, pares back enforcement of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, despite years of warnings by U.S. intelligence agencies that the foreign malign influence operations involving disinformation were a growing and dangerous threat. And that sounds conservative to me because I think foreign malign influence is a huge reason it's impossible to prove that why Donald Trump won in 2016. But to the question of the disbanding of the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, why did they do that?
Well, because this is an utterly corrupt administration and they think somehow they will get some other benefit from it. The principal job of counterintelligence is with the FBI. There have been a number of known cases where the FBI was able to stop terrorist attacks. They would have been bombings or shootings or other crimes. There are many, many more we're not going to hear about because of the need to maintain security on that, because there are other bad people out there. But essentially, the Trump administration has just told President Xi in China, Kim in North Korea, Vladimir Putin, MBS in Saudi Arabia, and most important, the mullahs in Iran, that they are now free to come and assassinate Americans, attack Americans. And it's because these people don't know what they're doing. Remember, we have a president of the United States who, in his first term, shortly after he took office, went to Japan. He stopped off in Honolulu because there's a Trump hotel, has his name on it. And in typical Trump fashion, it's not on the beach, it's a block back. On their way from the Trump hotel, that he doesn't own it, just gets paid for his name on it, to go to Pearl Harbor and the USS Arizona Memorial, where there are about 2,800 sailors who died. He goes to his chief of staff, retired Marine General Kelly. What are we going here for? And Kelly, in his memoir, says he had to explain to Trump what happened on December 7, 1941, a date that will live in infamy. Donald didn't know. How can you grow up in America and not have at least a minimal understanding of the Japanese attack on January 7th? And I'm sorry, December 7th, 1941. We have a man in the White House who is appallingly ignorant. And I've had many conversations one-on-one with Donald where I had to restrain myself from just laughing at how uninformed he is. Yeah. Trust me, at times I had to suppress the desire to burst out laughing at him. And he surrounded himself with people, they don't know anything about national security, diplomacy. And this is a 3-dimensional, if not 4 or 5-dimensional game of world chess. It's not checkers.
Let me ask you about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau being attacked, closed, defunded. The main U.S. agency tasked with overseeing the financial products and services used by everyday Americans, from credit cards to checking accounts to home loans, is the latest target of the Trump administration's effort to remake the federal government. That's NPR putting it lightly. I put it a lot darker. I followed this. I covered this. I was on the air every day talking to people like you about the global financial crisis, the causes, and the solutions to prevent it from ever happening again, which negatively affected wealthy, affluent white people like me, who bought a house in 2007, turned the key, and then was underwater for the next 12 years. So this agency was created to protect us from the banks, credit card companies, all kinds of different scams and scammers. And it was very successful. You could pick any agency apart. You can point to any mistake they made, any kind of interpreted waste. Yep. But with this one, its importance, what are your concerns about that one?
Well, this agency was conceived by Elizabeth Warren, whom I've known almost as long as I've known Donald. And what Congress had ultimately adopted was not exactly what she wanted, but close enough. We've spent as taxpayers about $6 billion on it since 2011, and they've recovered more than $21 billion. So here's a government program that is incredibly beneficial. It's a 3.5 to 1 ratio. And the people who benefit from it are folks who, let's remember, Wells Fargo Bank created 8 million phony accounts and charged people money for them. There are all sorts of companies that you can show, here is your email to me canceling my subscription or whatever, and yet you keep taking money from me and won't stop. And the credit card companies say, well, they have an authorization from you and they won't do anything. This agency steps in. Gee, I paid off my mortgage, but suddenly the bank is putting my house up for sale for non-payment of the mortgage. Here's the document filed at the courthouse where the bank would say, we don't know anything about that. These horrible things that shouldn't happen. And of course, you have to shut that down if what you're trying to do is compromise these big banks and other institutions. Now, here's one of the related problems. If you lower the standards for things, then honest companies have to engage in dishonest behavior. When in the late 1900s, very end of the century, so 25, 30 years ago, MCI came along and said, we'll sell you long distance telephone for nothing, almost nothing. And AT&T's chairman, Michael Armstrong, had an internal study done going, how can they sell long distance services for a tiny fraction of what we pay? And it turns out the study people came back to him and said, the only way they can do this is dishonest accounting. It's what they're selling, what they're telling their investors has to all be lies. Well, in fact, we eventually learned it was lies, and Bernie Ebbers got a long prison sentence for this. But AT&T, to compete, was going to go lose its business unless they did similar sorts of things. Now, Donald Trump was asked under oath once, what do you know about accounting? I don't know anything about accounting.
Yeah.
He spent, they said the interrogators, because they had him under oath, spent page after page after page tying him down 6 ways to heaven that he doesn't know anything about accounting. So he wouldn't understand any of this. And all he knows is, oh, Obama was in favor of this. Bad, must be gotten rid of. Elizabeth Warren, bad, get rid of it.
You use the MCI example, but I think the more recent example, which is very similar, is that a bunch of banks took these risks and gave out these risky loans, and then more reasonable banks with better credit ratings and loan lenders had to get on board to be able to compete, until in the end, even the government lender had to get on board and give out loans to stay in business as well. And so that story was never told very easily or accurately to the American public.
Well, I'm going to question you there. I wrote about it. I took part in what was called the autopsy of the corrections, but the stories that appeared in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere were not well done. And my former newspaper, the New York Times, which overall is incredibly important, but every other institution screws up, unfortunately had a reporter on this who wrote a book saying that essentially the bankers were the victims of the 2008 collapse. It led to the TV series that he's getting paid for. He is an apologist for Wall Street. He's not inaccurate. His point of view is apologia for the rich and powerful on Wall Street. And they were the perpetrators, yet he portrays them as the victims.
Right. Well, that's often the case to get it happens at the school board level as well, about all kinds of things. So, but the point being, CFPB was created to prevent, in this case, the banks from breaking rules and giving out irresponsible loans and everything else that they did. And now the CFPB has been destroyed. And that's only just a little bit of what it does. And so now the banks and other businesses can have a lot more leeway and free reign to scam and screw us. But there's that one. And
Elon. Now the problem is, Pete, that the MAGA people who are going to be the victims of this, they're going to have it explained to them by Donald's people as, no, this is somehow the Democrats, it's Biden.
Well, they still think, that they were underwater on their mortgage, or the financial crisis was caused by poor Black people buying homes they couldn't afford. They still believe that.
Right. And it's going to take time for this to flow through. I don't think the fact that eggs are going to be more expensive, not less, going forward for the next several months is enough. But eventually enough things should pile up that some people in the MAGA movement should begin saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? And they're not going to buy the notion that it's Joe Biden's fault. How long that will take and how much damage will be done, and whether it'll be too late to prevent Donald from making himself our dictator, those are unknowns.
What do you want to say here at the end about Elon Musk?
Well, the richest man in the world is literally killing the poorest people in the world. He shut down with no authority. All of this shutting down of agencies is illegal because Congress, under our Constitution, makes the law. Congress decides to spend the money. We had the impoundment efforts by Richard Nixon, which the Supreme Court said, no, Congress makes the law. If Congress says spend the money, you have to spend the money. And here's this private citizen, the richest man in the world. So we already have people who are dead because he shut down AID. People who were supposed to get medicine and didn't. We will have starving children dying soon. And this is so outrageously immoral. And yet there are plenty of pastors out there telling their flocks this is the right thing to do. It's that they can call themselves Christians, but they're not. They're the exact opposite of that. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. And Trump has hinted that he may not follow court orders. They so far haven't complied with some of the court orders. He says, well, I'll appeal. But he's also in the past quoted his favorite president, the literally murderous Andrew Jackson, from the 1820s as saying of an order from the Supreme Court, well, Justice Marshall has issued his opinion, let's see him enforce it. And I won't be surprised if they don't enforce orders of courts, they openly disobey them. But Elon Musk, by the way, a lot of people don't know this. Elon Musk's grandparents on his mother's side were Canadian Nazis.
Yeah.
When the war ended in 1945, they moved to South Africa to be around people who were like themselves. And what did the Trump administration just announce with the role of Elon Musk as he's our de facto president? Well, they announced that they want to offer refuge to white farmers in South Africa because they're being oppressed.
My understanding is those people, those white farmers in South Africa said, we're not asking for that. We don't want that. We don't want to leave. That's
right. But it tells you the mindset.
I know they're turning away everybody and inviting people that want to be here.
Right.
And inviting people that don't necessarily want to be here.
Because unlike you and me, they're not white. And they're not perceived as Western European white.
And Elon Musk is very, very white. But Trump has a portrait of Andrew Jackson up in the Oval Office. Trump very well. If you were a betting man, what would you say he could say anything about Andrew Jackson? What do you think?
He has. He said he's admired him because he was forceful and he took charge. And
okay, but he doesn't know forceful and took charge. Okay, but what did he do? What did he do, sir? He had something to the Native Americans, and I think he likes that.
Oh, yes. No. Well, in fact, Andrew Jackson was responsible for I think it's the March of Tears, but other horrible events involving and murdering indigenous people.
Trump hates Native Americans.
This administration in court has argued that Native peoples do not have birthright citizenship. And it's a cockamamie argument that has no basis in fact. The Constitution is crystal clear. This is where originalism and textualism is going to come back and bite them. But to argue that Native American peoples can't vote or shouldn't be allowed to vote, how much more clear a sign do you need that this is a male white supremacist administration?
Well, as soon as you brought Elon Musk in, we knew it a long time ago. I'll let you go. I do want to say, and I don't want to embarrass you, but I actually have a painting of David Cay Johnston in my studio. So,
well, that's wonderful. I have some journalism things here at the Rochester Institute of Technology, where I'm a professor now full time.
I just have several pictures of you up. I hope that's cool.
Well,
you're a national treasure.
Better than having her name went out of my mind.
Andrew Jackson?
No. All the actress from TV who all the teenage boys had up on their wall back when you and I were young.
Oh, well, I had several of them as well. And then luckily got to interview them at some point in my career. So it all came full circle. Thank you very much for joining me. As always,
thank you, Pete.
I really appreciate it. I'm so glad you're still out there doing great original reporting and talking to people like me. It's really important. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Take care.
Hey.